boop, boop. What's up, ladies and gentlemen, and my fellow reptilian? My name's Scythe, and we are back again with some more Trove. Not using the face cam today, sorry to say, folks, but I don't know. I'm a little bit sore right now, so I'm using a bit of a thing to kind of make my life a little bit more comfortable. But it looks absolutely stupid, and I don't want to use it on the face cam. Now you're all curious about it, right? Ask in the comments if you're actually curious. No, you're not. So there's a couple things that I wanted to talk about today. Let's just consider this another of the Let's Play episode, but we're going to actually be on our main account rather than being on my alternate account. So let's just go do what we've been doing for 50,000 years since the update has actually come out, which is going to U10. I wanted to talk about a couple things while I had your attention, though, before we end up going to the New Beginnings series once again. One more in particular was the 10K farms. So if you don't know what these are, I don't want to get into too much detail about them, but basically there are these 10K farms that people call them, or it's a 10 farm or something. I don't know the terminology, but basically it's people ended up getting the NPCs in the Luminopolis city into their cornerstone. And I didn't know for the longest time, like I always thought that people were setting up these special outpost quests in their cornerstones by meticulously using launch pads and stuff like that to end up getting these NPCs into their cornerstones over and over and over again. Turns out, like, I was dead wrong. I didn't know that if you get these NPCs into your cornerstone, they will just respawn with your cornerstone. Like, for some reason, the game actually considers the NPC to be a block entity or something, so it actually will generate with your house, which is crazy to think. Like, if I knew that, even I might have done it. No, not really, because for some reason they consider it to be an exploit. More so than not, though, we've actually been hearing quite a few things of people getting banned for doing this and being a part of these farms, even just participating. So I wanted to have this as the definitive heads up video, everybody. Let you know, don't do it. Okay, it's just not worth it. As far as I've heard, it's a temporary ban for some people. But have they ended up getting their accounts appealed? I don't know, because right now trying to actually deal with support is an absolute mess, because you still go through the lines to deal with Tryon Worlds support, but of course Tryon Worlds isn't in charge of Trove anymore, so it's like, it's really, really weird. And what I've heard some people having to go through and deal with, like, it's like, I personally hate dealing with tech support, so it's just a big pet peeve of mine. I get so frustrated and I can't stand it. I can't even believe the amount of holes that you gotta go through in order to end up getting a proper response and to figure out the right channels of, like, okay, what am I actually going to do to get my Trove account back? So I'll just tell you guys, don't do it, okay? Because as far as I've heard, they're just banning people at random. Merc was telling me that the big reason why they're actually banning these people, which makes sense, is that they don't like that people actually will end up setting up a 10K farm, and they basically have a bot program running so that the account never ends up logging out, which of course means that they're staying in the server and lagging the game because the world isn't despawning. But on top of that, it automatically invites new players to that world, and then those players can end up potentially doing the same thing. So it's got to do with this game's crummy server stability issues, where every single thing that you end up doing just ends up overheating everything. How do you like that mod, you guys? That's not a Rampage mod. That is a mod that tells you your Tome is done, Tommy. Which I love it, man. That's a great mod. Whoever ended up making that, if you're watching this, awesome job. Is conveniences like that I absolutely love about, well, I guess I would say the PC version of the game, but I hope that someday console players end up getting it. But anyways, long story short, yeah, just don't do the 10K farms, man. It's just a mistake, okay? So just stay away from them. Stay away from people that do them. It's unfortunate, it really is, and kind of brings up another topic that I wanted to discuss, which I ended up talking about pretty extensively with Merc, which was some ideas of how we could end up actually improving Trove if we were kind of in charge of development, or, you know, hypothetically, if the devs ended up actually listening to the community. And one of the biggest things that we were talking about was this whole 10K farm thing, and how the reason why players are doing it in the first place is because dungeon XP just isn't efficient enough. Like, you actually end up getting more XP, better XP from doing outpost quests in the Luminopolis, and also by doing Bomber Royale, which is really disappointing because I personally think that grinding dungeons should just outright give you the best XP in the game, because, I mean, you're just grinding, you know? But then there was a couple other things that, you know, I've talked about in the past, and I wanted to bring these topics up as well, which, if the devs would ever end up listening to us about these things, these are just kind of my ideas that I wanted to refresh for 2019, I guess. Which apparently my opinion is shared with quite a few people, Mark was telling me, and he was sharing the same opinion as well. Without, it's not like I brought this opinion up, it's not like it's my own original idea or anything, is what I'm trying to say. It's just, I kind of thought about it for myself, by myself, and then ended up hearing, oh, a lot of other people are actually thinking the same thing, and that is Paragon levels. So there's this thing called Paragon levels in most other games that Diablo ended up kind of popularizing, and basically what it is when you end up getting your character to max level, you can continuously gain XP, and which will end up giving your character more stats and making you stronger, and basically ends up making the game an infinite grind, so that we're actually, you know, working towards something. On top of adding something like this to the game, you know, which would potentially end up just giving us actually something worth fighting for by doing all these dungeons and stuff like that, somebody like myself and some of the old school players, we would actually be able to, you know, say, oh yeah, I'm actually like the strongest in the entire game, just because we've non-stop been grinding it for like 4 years, and you know, pay to win players hopefully wouldn't have a way of getting around that. But then on top of that, okay, let's talk about the tomes, because that's pretty much just what the end game of Trove is right now. And in all honesty, I think tomes should just be removed from the game at this point. You know, they don't end up adding any value to the game. They're actually really annoying. I personally think that all of your tomes, like, you shouldn't have to equip the tome at the least. If we keep the tomes, they should all just be on a daily and weekly reset, and you should just be grinding all of them at once, instead of forcing the player to end up spending time grinding dungeons so that we can end up getting a bunch of useless items that we're not going to end up using just because of the sake of trying to stock up, you know? Like, just let us use all the tomes at once, or just outright remove them. Another thing too that I think would add a lot to the game is dungeon variation. So obviously there's only two different ideas that the devs can end up coming up with, which is cursed skulls and a dungeon boss. Every single aspect of Trove is designed this way. There are only ever two different types of dungeons. This includes shadow towers as well, except for the shadow tower bosses obviously are, I mean, they're different, but what are they other than an elite mob that has a lot more health and a couple different abilities, which, I mean, arguably so, is still really, really cool. I think that they can go ahead and keep the same things, but they should just vary it up. Rather than having a cursed skull all the time when we're fighting 30 enemies off, how's about make a little Cubesley dude, similar to when you get into the tutorial area, make NPCs that are out in the world actually asking for help, so that we feel like we're, you know, actually good people and doing something. Or make it so that maybe there would end up being some outposts generated that would end up being peaceful areas. We could end up having villages spawn, and that could end up being potentially another thing that players could end up designing, because obviously the devs don't really have the best imagination when it comes to building. Nothing against them, but it's like players are just always going to end up doing a better job of these things, because the players are the lifeblood of this game, whereas the developers are the developers. They deliver new content, whereas players can deliver content based on the current engine and stuff like that. And basically I'm just saying is that dungeon designers could potentially end up designing these peaceful towns that could end up generating. These could end up having flask areas, NPCs, and, you know, ultimately kind of be these hub zones that other players could end up kind of hanging out in while you're out in the world. Obviously at the end game it wouldn't really be as relevant, but I think at the beginning of the game it would bring the social value of the game up quite a lot. Not to mention there could end up being merchants, and maybe even some quest lines that you can end up getting from them, you know, some advanced adventuring quest lines or whatever, so that starting players wouldn't have to end up getting into a maxed out club or just doing outposts in like a few select specific areas, you know. I mean, it could just, the sky's the limit as far as this idea is concerned. We could end up having the town be attacked. That could end up being another random thing as well. Maybe, you know, you got to end up saving these dudes, and then when you end up completing that, it just gives you the same as completing a dungeon. You know, you get a bunch of XP, maybe you get some loot, what have you. I think also it would be really cool if they had progression a little bit more streamlined in that regard as well. It would be cool if we ended up upgrading, say, fixtures on a larger scale. So there could end up being maybe, I don't know if it would be related to a cornerstone. This is getting a little bit more complicated here. But let's say you could end up having a town generate, and you could end up contributing to that town, and all players could end up contributing to that town. That would just ultimately end up making it level up more and more and more, or I don't know, just make the towns more expansive when you get to the later tiered areas, or what have you. Who knows? Rampage bosses too, I think that they should just, they just gotta go. They're just boring. They should just make it so that a rampage boss in itself should just be a giant boss that you can randomly find out in the world, kind of similar to the dragon bosses that we have for the Choco Dragon, the Acid Water Dragon and stuff. Like these are things that they made like a couple dragon bosses, and I really always wanted to see that fleshed out, because they're like so cool to fight when you end up finding them. But unfortunately, the other biggest aspect of the game that kind of ruins it is that it's either time gated or it's way too low chances of actually finding. Like, finding those dragon bosses is way too rare, dude. Like, you should just find them all the time. It shouldn't be some rare thing. And I know they want to make the dragons harder to get, but I mean, they're already hard enough to get, considering the fact that they end up upping the amount of dragon souls that it ends up costing and stuff, you know? Also, just player stats in general needs to be completely overhauled so that we're not doing max damage, because that's the thing, is the light and dark stat that they added to the game, as far as I'm concerned, is absolutely pointless. The only reason that they needed to do something like that is the same reason that they needed to do it with Ultra Shadow Towers, where they need to nerf the player's damage, because we're already doing the maximum amount of damage that the game's code is allowed to give. And so they have to end up lowering our damage so that we don't end up just one-shotting all these enemies, because we're already dealing over their maximum amount of health. This is just a limitation with the game's engine, and unfortunately the devs won't go through the code to save their life to end up nerfing all these numbers. Like, doing 100k damage should be a big deal, not doing 100 mil damage. Like, we should never be at that point where we're dealing that much damage. Just bring down the damage numbers of absolutely everything and all the classes and all the characters. Just lower the percentage of it all to balance it out, so that we don't need to have that whole you know, nerfing our damage thing, because I feel that that is something very similar to the other game that I play on the channel. Maple Story has a system like that called Fair Fight. And thankfully, the devs are actually removing that system from the game, because players hate it. You know, it basically makes it feel like you're not progressing when suddenly you're just thrown into this later area where the enemies don't feel tough or intimidating or anything. It just feels like there's an invisible stat blocking the way of you being able to do as much damage as you're actually able to do. And that's never something that should be in a game. Like, anything that ends up taking away from the player, I just strongly disagree with as a gamer and as somebody that's played games my entire life. I always prefer to have control, you know? Like, that's kind of what games are about, right? It's this whole, like, illusion of control of your character in this digital world, and it's like presenting that to the player as best as they possibly can, in my mind, is a developer's job, just because that's what video games are all about, isn't it? So anyways, I don't want to go on too much of a philosophical tangent about how video games should be in a nutshell, because we're just trying to talk about Trove in general, and the aspects of it that I think could end up really being improved upon. Now, the few things that we have actually discussed today would actually not be as complicated as it might sound. Like adding Paragon levels, that could just end up being something that they would slowly end up working towards, but ultimately could end up being something good. And generally, I think that they should also just remove mastery from all the store items. Like, I don't think that that's fair. I think they should really move Trove towards a vanity shop. And hopefully Game Ago is going to end up doing that, because they've kind of had official statements mentioning how they want to move their free-to-play games more towards it, because they got to get with the times, because the cash shop pay-to-win model that we've got with Trove obviously is not successful, as evidenced by Tryon Worlds going bankrupt. You know, that already just shows right there that this pay-to-win model doesn't work anymore, you know, in this day and age. You look at a game like Apex Legends, which, you know, came out of nowhere and thankfully ended up copying two of the most successful not free-to-play, but two of the most successful cash shops you could ever get in a video game, which is loot boxes, the same as Overwatch, where you can end up having a random chance of getting some really good costumes that aren't in rotation, because then they also ended up copying Fortnite rotations, where the store basically is going to end up having a certain item or certain items that will end up being on a daily rotation and cycling out. And I think Trove could end up learning a thing or two by copying a system like that, you know, on top of the fact that it would end up making Trove less disgusting, and players would end up being a little bit more loyal towards it, show a little bit more respect towards the game, which I think is one of the biggest reasons why so many people quit this game, is because they lose their respect for it. You know, we get these developers that basically feel like they're kind of bullying us or pigeonholing players into playing the game that the developers want us to play, rather than the game that the players want to play. Like, the game should evolve into what the players want, rather than evolving or devolving, I should say, to what the developers want. Because in all honesty, the people that are developing in this game, they're not really the most inventive, forward-thinking people as far as video games are concerned, which I'm not expecting Trove to be the best game of all time, guys, okay? But it most definitely is my favorite game of all time, and that's why I'm so passionate about it, and that's why I would wish that these things could end up coming to fruition, even if only a couple of them. I mean, heck, if I was in charge, I would just kind of remove mastery or tweak it to, you know, a bigger extent. Make it so that you end up getting the stats out of Paragon, get no stats out of mastery. Maybe you just get vanity items out of mastery. Maybe make it so that as you gain Paragon levels, you get more mastery. Another idea Merc was talking about with some other people in the Discord was maybe an idea of mounts that you end up using. You could end up leveling those up, you know, to end up giving yourself more mastery, or just give yourself like maybe more movement speed and more jump while you're actually using that mount. For myself personally, I would prefer something a little bit more streamlined, though I do think it's a good idea that you could end up leveling all your mounts, because technically it does give you infinite content for this game. Yes, arguably so, but something like that I think would be a little bit too daunting, and I think would be better if maybe it was based on categories. Maybe there would be land mounts, air mounts, water mounts that you could end up earning XP towards. Maybe even those would end up having Paragon levels, so that you could level them an infinite amount. Even if you wouldn't end up getting certain stats to necessarily end up scaling off of that, maybe, you know, you would end up getting 0.3 movement speed for your mount for every Paragon level after 50 or something like that. Just as a, you know, random number to throw out there. I don't know. But anyways, this is all just hypothetics. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below about not only these ideas, but what are your own ideas on this? Because I think it's really cool for us to kind of, you know, flex our brain here and talk about the aspects that we do enjoy about the game, and the aspects that we think could end up being a lot better, rather than being like overly critical about the game. I want to kind of have this as a video to steer towards the positivity. There's just so much potential for this game. Like, it's like, I love the game at its core values, but the rest of it is just like, go away, like throw it out, you know? Like, change it, just change the record, get with the times. Who cares? Thanks for watching, everybody. Don't forget to like, sub, hit that notification bell. Also, you can use that support link down below. If you're a new player to Trove, sign up with that link down below, and anything you end up buying out of the store is going to end up helping me out. But if you do want to go the extra mile and are an existing player, you can always end up buying stuff from my real life Life merch store, which is in the description. Check out the link to Gawkbox, which is a way you can donate to me for free. You can also sponsor the YouTube channel, or you could do a secret thing where you could create a new Trove account, buy a bunch of credit pouches by signing in through this link, sell the credit pouches, and then trade the flux to your main account. Now we're thinking with portals. Thanks for watching. Sign on and stay epic, everybody.